Chapter 5. Blood in the Valley. The first spear flew before the sun had fully cleared the walls of Orgrimmar. It struck a Kor'kron shield with a sharp crack, splintering against the iron without drawing blood. For one suspended heartbeat, the Valley of Spirits fell silent. Then the commander lowered his hand. Kill the traitors. The world erupted. The Kor'kron advanced in disciplined ranks, shields locked together as they pushed into the narrow streets. The trolls had no such formation. They fought as hunters, as survivors. They struck from rooftops, alleyways, and windows. Spears rained down from above, while hunters loosed arrows from hidden perches. The winding streets of the Valley of Spirits became a maze, and for a few precious moments, the larger orcs lost their advantage. Taza stood beside his father, behind an overturned market stall. "You remember what you taught me?" Rokhani tightened his grip on his spear. "Stay alive." Taza smiled. "No." His father looked at him. "Protect family." Rokhani managed the faintest smile. "Good." The first Kor'kron rounded the corner. Taza lunged. His spear drove into the orc's thigh, dropping the soldier to one knee. Before the orc could recover, Rokhani slammed the butt of his spear into the warrior's jaw. The orc collapsed. Neither troll celebrated. Another 5 took his place. Across the street, Lashka ushered terrified children into the cellar beneath an abandoned shrine. "Hurry!" Jeku stumbled on the steps. She caught him before he fell. "Stay quiet." "But Papa, they know what they're doing." She prayed the words were true. The fighting spread through every corner of the district. Blue blood stained the stones. Red blood joined it. Neither side had enough time to mourn. Mebo stood outside the shrine, leaning heavily on his walking stick. The crude replacement Ziri had carved after the Kor'kron destroyed his original one. His wounded shoulder still bled through fresh bandages. He should not have been standing. Yet there he was. A young troll barely older than Taza rushed toward him. "They're breaking through." Mebo nodded. "Then we hold." "We can't." "We can." The young troll stared at the old shadow hunter. "There are too many." Mebo smiled sadly. "There always are." The Kor'kron crashed into the square. An enormous orc captain charged forward, swinging a massive axe. The young troll froze. Fear rooted him to the ground. Mebo stepped between them. The axe came down. The old shadow hunter turned just enough that the blade bit deep into his side instead of his chest. Pain exploded through him. Still, he did not fall. With surprising speed, he thrust his broken walking stick into the captain's throat. The sharpened end punched through a gap beneath the helmet. The captain staggered backward, choking. He collapsed. The young troll caught Mebo before he hit the ground. "You saved me." The old troll coughed blood. "No," he smiled weakly. "Now you save somebody else." His eyes drifted toward the sky. For a moment, the sounds of battle seemed very far away. "I hear the waves." His breathing slowed. "Echo isles." Then, nothing. The young troll gently closed Mebo's eyes. There was no time for tears. The battle demanded more. Near the center of the district, Rokhani and Taza fought back to back. Every muscle burned. Every breath hurt. 3 Kor'kron lay motionless around them. A 4th circled carefully. The orc's armor marked him as a veteran. He studied the 2 trolls. "You should have stayed obedient." Rokhani answered without lowering his weapon. "We did. And look where it got us." The veteran snarled and charged. Steel rang against wood. The orc's axe shattered Taza's spear shaft. The young troll barely avoided the next swing. Rokhani slammed into the orc's side, knocking all 3 of them into the mud. The veteran recovered first. His axe rose high, straight toward Taza. Rokhani saw the strike coming. There wasn't enough time. So he didn't think. He moved. The axe buried itself deep into his shoulder. Bone cracked. His arm went numb instantly, but his son still stood. Baba. Taza caught his father as he fell. Rokhani's face twisted with pain, yet he managed a tired grin. Told ya. Blood spilled between his fingers. Protect family. Taza roared, not in anger alone, in grief, in exhaustion, in every humiliation the family had endured. He seized the fallen orc's axe. With a cry that echoed through the Valley of Spirits, he drove it into the veteran's chest. The Kor'kron warrior collapsed without another word. The battle slowed, not because either side wished it, because both had become exhausted. Smoke drifted through the district as homes burned. The Valley of Spirits no longer resembled a neighborhood. It resembled a battlefield. Lashka found Rokhani sitting against a shattered shrine. His wounded shoulder had been wrapped as tightly as possible. The bleeding had slowed, but not stopped. She knelt beside him. You stubborn fool. He laughed painfully. You married me. I know. I've been regretting it ever since. She smiled through tears. Liar. As the family gathered around him, an unnatural silence settled over the valley. The Kor'kron had stopped advancing. The trolls had stopped attacking. Everyone looked toward the city's western gate. Heavy footsteps echoed through Orgrimmar. Not marching, running. A messenger, covered in dust and blood, sprinted into the square. He shouted before he even reached the defenders. Vol'jin lives! The words swept through the battered district. He escaped. Another shout. Oh, the Tauren have risen. Another. The Echo Isles are fighting. Then the messenger cried the words no one had dared believe they would hear. We ain't alone anymore. For the first time in months, cheers erupted in the Valley of Spirits. Weak, broken, filled with tears. But real. Rokhani looked at his family, at Taza standing taller than ever before, at Ziri still clutching the carved frog she had repaired, at little Jakku, who smiled despite the smoke and fear. The horde they had believed in was gone. Perhaps another could still be saved. Far above them, black banners bearing Garrosh's emblem snapped in the hot desert wind. But beneath those banners, the people had finally begun to stand. Shadows beneath the red banner. Chapter 6. A horde worth fighting for. The rebellion did not begin with armies. It began with survivors. Word spread through Orgrimmar like wildfire carried on a desert wind. The trolls had refused to kneel. The Tauren were openly defying Garrosh. Orcs who had once fought proudly beneath Thrall's banner quietly disappeared from their barracks under the cover of darkness. Some never returned. Others returned, wearing no Kor'kron colors at all. The horde was breaking, not because its enemies stood at its gates, because its people could no longer recognize what it had become. The Valley of Spirits had become a fortress. Broken carts formed barricades. Hunters watched every rooftop. Healers worked without sleep. Every home sheltered someone who had lost everything. Lashka moved among the wounded carrying water that barely existed and hope that somehow still did. She stopped beside a young orc whose leg had been pierced by a spear. He wore no Kor'kron armor, only battered leather. He looked at her with shame. I fought for Garrosh. Lashka carefully changed his bandage. Do you still? The orc stared at the ground. No. Then drink. He accepted the water with trembling hands. For the first time in weeks, he wept. Rokhani's shoulder would never fully heal. The axe had shattered bone and torn muscle beyond repair. He could still lift a spear, just not for long. He sat outside the family hut, watching Jakku chase a tiny lizard through the dusty street. The child laughed. The sound startled him. He had almost forgotten what laughter sounded like. Baba! Jakku proudly held up the tiny lizard before letting it scamper away. When this is over, the boy climbed into his father's lap as gently as he could. Can we go home? Rokhani looked toward the west, beyond the canyon, beyond the sea, beyond memory. The Echo Isles? Jakku nodded. I want to see where you grew up. Rokhani smiled. So do I. That evening, a messenger arrived under the protection of several Darkspear scouts. His armor was scarred, his face was exhausted, but his eyes burned with purpose. The rebellion marches. Every troll in the square fell silent. Vol'jin calls every soul willing to fight. The messenger looked over the gathered families. Not for revenge. He paused. For the Horde. Taza tightened the straps on his armor. It hardly deserved the name. Leather patched with cloth. A borrowed axe. One surviving dagger. Lashka adjusted the necklace around his neck. It was made from a tiny carved frog. Ziri had spent all night making it. So you remember home? Taza embraced his sister. I never forgot. Before dawn, the defenders gathered outside the Valley of Spirits. Not hundreds, not thousands. Just ordinary people. Fishermen, hunters, laborers, mothers, old warriors who could barely stand. Young trolls who had never seen real battle until yesterday. Rokhani stood among them. His injured arm rested in a sling. His spear remained in his good hand. Taza looked at him. You shouldn't be here. Rokhani chuckled. I've been hearing that a lot lately. As the first rays of sunlight reached the valley, another group approached from the opposite street. Orcs. The trolls instinctively raised their weapons. The lead orc removed his helmet. Gray streaked his black hair. His face bore old scars. I served beside trolls in Northrend. He slowly laid his axe upon the ground. I won't fight them today. Behind him, 20 more orcs did the same. No speeches followed. None were needed. One by one, the trolls lowered their weapons. Trust would take time, but it had to begin somewhere. By midday, the rebels marched from Orgrimmar to join the growing resistance gathering beyond the city. The road was lined with civilians. Some watched in fearful silence. Others quietly placed food into the hands of passing trolls. A Taran woman embraced Lashka without saying a word. An elderly orc bowed his head as Rokhani passed. A goblin slipped Jeku an apple and quickly walked away before anyone noticed. Small axe, tiny axe. Enough to remind them that Garrosh ruled the Horde. He did not own it. Months later, the war was over. Siege of Orgrimmar had ended. Garrosh Hellscream had fallen. The black Kor'kron banners were gone. Orgrimmar was quieter now, not peaceful. Healing rarely was. The family stood together on the shores of the Echo Isles. Warm ocean waves rolled gently onto white sand. Palm trees swayed in the breeze. Jeku laughed as he chased tiny crabs through the surf. Ziri sat carving frogs beneath a broad tree. This time, no one crushed them. Taza looked across the water. I used to think strength meant winning every fight. Rokhani stood beside him. His injured shoulder still ached every morning. It don't? The younger troll shook his head. No. He watched his mother smiling as she gathered shells with Jeku. It means protecting people until they can smile again. Rokhani nodded slowly. Now you understand. As the sun began to set, a small gathering formed on the beach. Families who had survived, families who had not. Names were spoken aloud, one by one. The dead were remembered. When Mibo's name was spoken, Ziri quietly placed his repaired walking stick into the sea. The tide carried it away, toward the horizon, toward memory. That night, drums echoed across the Echo Isles once more. Not drums of war, drums of home. Rokhani watched the firelight dance across his family's faces. They had been starved, beaten, humiliated. They had buried friends. They had carried scars that would never fade. Garrosh had tried to convince them they were lesser. He had failed because dignity could be stolen for a time. It could be bruised. It could be bloodied. But as long as one person stood beside another and refused to let go, it could never truly be conquered. The fire crackled softly. Beyond it, the sea whispered against the shore. For the first time in many years, the future did not feel like a sentence. It felt like a promise, and somewhere in the warm island night, carried by the wind and the waves, came the sound every Darkspear had longed to hear again. They were home. Epilogue, what remains? Years passed. Children who had once hidden beneath burning homes became hunters. Young warriors who had marched against Garrosh grew old enough to tell stories instead of living them. Scars faded from skin. They never faded from memory. Rokhani often sat alone on a weathered dock overlooking the waters of the Echo Isles. His wounded shoulder still ached whenever storms rolled in from the sea. Jeku, now nearly grown, once asked why he never cursed Garrosh's name anymore. The old trolls smiled before answering, because if I spend my whole life hating one man, he skipped a stone across the water, then that man still rules me. Jeku frowned. But he hurt us. He did. He killed our friends. He did. He almost took everything. Rokhani nodded. And that be exactly why I refused to give him the rest. The boy was silent. Some lessons could not be taught, only lived. The greatest danger Garrosh ever posed had not been his armies, nor his Kor'kron, nor even the prisons he built.